Picture this. March 1942, a massive factory floor in Buffalo, New York. A worker stands frozen, wrench in hand, as he hears words that send chills down his spine. "I'm not flying that death trap." Another test pilot just walked away from the Bell P-39 Airacobra, and this wasn't the first time. It was the fifth refusal that week alone. There she sits under the bright hangar lights, paint still wet, looking absolutely revolutionary with her unusual mid-engine design, modern tricycle landing gear, and a massive 37mm cannon right in the nose. She's stunning, innovative, a masterpiece of engineering. But the men who were supposed to fly her into battle, they had a different name for this revolutionary machine. They called her the flying coffin. Now, what made this rejection so heartbreaking was the timing. America desperately needed fighters, any fighters. The factories were running non-stop, 3 full shifts every single day, trying to build enough planes to push back against Germany and Japan. Yet here was this brand new fighter that nobody wanted to touch. British pilots tested it and immediately canceled their orders. The French never even got theirs before their country fell. American pilots took one look at the numbers and begged for transfers to literally anything else. Even Bell's own test pilots were starting to get nervous. The crazy thing is, if you just looked at this plane sitting there, you wouldn't understand what the problem was. The P-39 was sleek, modern, and packed more firepower than almost any fighter in the sky. That 37mm cannon could punch through armor like it was paper. The design was actually brilliant, at least on paper. By moving that big Allison engine behind the pilot instead of up front, Bell's engineers created perfect weight balance and freed up space in the nose for that devastating cannon. A long drive shaft ran underneath the cockpit floor, connecting the engine to the propeller through a complex system of gears and bearings. Brilliant in theory, absolutely. But theory and reality? They weren't even on speaking terms. That drive shaft created vibrations that shook the entire aircraft, making smooth, precise flying nearly impossible. Pilots described it like sitting on top of a washing machine at full spin. Even worse, that engine placement meant any mechanical failure sent metal chunks and flames straight toward the cockpit. In a normal fighter, engine problems happen right in front of you where you can see trouble coming. In the P-39, they happened behind you, often with zero warning until flames started licking at your back. But the aircraft's most deadly flaw showed up the moment pilots tried to climb. That Allison engine, powerful and strong at sea level, choked and gasped above 12,000 feet. This wasn't just inconvenient. This was a death sentence. German Messerschmitt fighters cruised comfortably at 25,000 feet. Japanese Zeros flew even higher. A P-39 pilot trying to intercept enemy bombers would find himself struggling for altitude while enemy fighters dove on him from above with every advantage imaginable. Colonel Bruce Holloway evaluated the P-39 for combat in early 1942, and his assessment was brutal. He wrote that the aircraft was fundamentally wrong for the high-altitude role it was designed for. Its ceiling was too low, its climb rate was poor above 10,000 feet, and its handling at altitude was downright dangerous. He couldn't in good conscience recommend this plane for combat against the Luftwaffe. That report should have killed the entire program right there. In any logical system, a plane that couldn't do its job would be canceled, and the factory would switch to building something better. But logic had no place in wartime production. The United States was still reeling from Pearl Harbor. Factories were being built. Workers were being trained. Production lines were humming. Canceling the P-39 would mean shutting down an entire manufacturing operation and starting from scratch, losing months or even years. So the factories kept running. Workers in Buffalo kept riveting airframes together, installing engines, mounting weapons on aircraft that American and British pilots flat out refused to fly. By spring 1942, hundreds of P-39s were rolling off the line with nowhere to go. They sat in storage fields across the country, rows and rows of unwanted fighters gathering dust while the war raged on without them. Then something unexpected happened. The Soviet Union, fighting desperately against the German invasion, needed aircraft, any aircraft they could get. Joseph Stalin made it crystal clear through diplomatic channels that he needed fighters, bombers, and tanks in massive quantities, and he needed them yesterday. The United States, eager to support its ally and keep the Eastern Front active, started shipping military equipment through the Lend-Lease program. Among those shipments were hundreds of P-39 Airacobras that nobody else wanted. American officials privately saw this as a way to get rid of an embarrassing mistake while technically helping the Soviets. The thinking went like this: send them the fighters we can't use, keep the good stuff for ourselves, and hope the Russians find some use for them. If the P-39s proved just as bad on the Eastern Front as they were in American service, well, at least it wouldn't be American pilots paying the price. The aircraft began an incredibly roundabout journey. They were loaded onto cargo ships in American ports, sailed through waters crawling with German submarines to Persian Gulf ports, then taken apart and transported overland through Iran into southern Russia. The trip took months. Many planes were damaged along the way. Some were lost to U-boat attacks. But by late 1942, the first P-39s arrived at Soviet air bases, where they received a reception completely different from what they'd experienced in America. Soviet pilots approached the Airacobra with fresh eyes, no preconceptions, no prejudices. They didn't care about high-altitude performance because they weren't fighting at high altitude. The air war over the Eastern Front was brutal, chaotic, and happened primarily below 10,000 feet. German Stuka dive bombers attacked Soviet positions at low level. Soviet fighters hit German tanks at treetop height. The desperate swirling dogfights that defined Eastern Front combat happened in thick air, where the P-39's Allison engine performed beautifully. The first Soviet units to get the Airacobra treated it like an experiment. Pilots used to flying the Lend-Lease, a wooden fighter that was underpowered and poorly armed, found the P-39 to be a revelation. That 37mm cannon could destroy a German bomber with a single well-placed shot. The plane's tough construction meant it could take battle damage that would have torn apart the fragile legs. And in the low-altitude environment where Soviet pilots operated, the P-39 was actually faster and more maneuverable than many German fighters. Senior Lieutenant Grigory Rechkalov was among the first Soviet pilots to fly combat missions in the Airacobra. His initial report, filed in October 1942, showed the cultural difference in how pilots judged aircraft. The American machine is heavy but solid. It does not climb well, but it dives like a stone. The cannon is magnificent. Today I destroyed a Junkers bomber with 3 shells. The entire tail section separated from the fuselage. This aircraft rewards aggression and punishes hesitation. That philosophy, rewarding aggression, punishing hesitation, became the foundation of Soviet Airacobra tactics. Pilots learned to use the plane's strengths while avoiding situations that exposed its weaknesses. They attacked fast from good positions, fired that devastating cannon, and broke away before enemy fighters could respond. In the hands of pilots who understood what it could do, the P-39 transformed from flying coffin to lethal predator. The pilot who truly mastered the Airacobra was Alexander Pokryshkin, a name that would become legendary in Soviet aviation. Born in 1913 in Novosibirsk, Pokryshkin started the war flying obsolete fighters, struggling against superior German aircraft with outdated equipment and tactics. When he switched to the P-39 in early 1943, he immediately saw its potential. Pokryshkin developed an entire tactical system designed specifically around what the Airacobra could do. He called it his formula for air combat, a careful approach that emphasized height advantage, speed control, and precise shooting. His pilots would patrol at medium altitude, around 15,000 feet, watching for German formations below. When they spotted targets, they'd dive, build tremendous speed, close to point-blank range, fire a quick burst from that 37mm cannon, then zoom climb away before enemy fighters could even react. The tactic was devastatingly effective. Pokryshkin's personal score started climbing fast. 5 kills, then 10, then 20. By the time the Battle of Kursk exploded in July 1943, he was the Soviet Union's top ace, and his unit, flying American-built Airacobras, was one of the most effective fighter regiments in the entire Red Air Force. German pilots started recognizing his radio call sign and warning each other when Pokryshkin was in the air. Achtung, Pokryshkin in the air became a common warning on German radio frequencies. The Battle of Kursk showed the P-39's capabilities on a massive scale. German forces launched their final major offensive on the Eastern Front, throwing thousands of tanks and aircraft into an attempt to surround and destroy Soviet forces near the city. The Luftwaffe sent its best units, expecting to dominate the sky quickly. Instead, they ran into Soviet fighter regiments equipped with P-39s flown by pilots who'd spent months perfecting their tactics. During the first week of battle, Pokryshkin's regiment claimed over 100 German aircraft destroyed. His personal count for July 1943 hit 23 confirmed kills. The German offensive, which counted on controlling the air to protect ground forces, found itself constantly harassed by Soviet fighters that appeared, struck, and vanished before the Luftwaffe could respond. The P-39's heavy firepower proved especially deadly against German Stuka dive bombers, which were slow and vulnerable to that cannon's devastating power. Reports of the P-39's success on the Eastern Front started filtering back to American intelligence by mid-1943, and the assessments were met with pure disbelief. The same aircraft American pilots had rejected as unfit for combat was reportedly one of the most effective fighters in Soviet service. Some analysts dismissed it as Soviet propaganda designed to make their American allies feel better about sending outdated equipment, but the evidence was overwhelming. Soviet requests through Lend-Lease channels specifically asked for more P-39s, not P-51 Mustangs, not P-47 Thunderbolts, but more of the supposedly terrible Airacobras. By 1944, the Soviet Union was receiving thousands of P-39s, and Soviet aces were using them to compile victory scores that matched the best American and British pilots. Pokryshkin would end the war with 59 confirmed kills, all achieved in American-built fighters, primarily the P-39. The reason for this dramatic difference in performance came down to where and how the plane was used. American fighter doctrine in 1942 emphasized high-altitude bomber escort and interception. The P-39 was designed for exactly that role, and it failed miserably. Soviet doctrine emphasized low-altitude ground attack and tactical air control. For that mission, the P-39 was nearly perfect. The same features that made it terrible for one type of war made it ideal for another. Back in the United States, Bell Aircraft's engineers were learning from the P-39's contradictory reputation. The plane's failures exposed critical design flaws, but its successes validated certain innovative concepts. The tricycle landing gear, initially controversial, proved far better than old-style taildragger designs. It gave better visibility during takeoff and landing, reduced accidents, and made the plane easier for new pilots to handle. The company started work on an improved version called the P-63 King Cobra. This plane kept the P-39's basic layout but featured a more powerful engine, better aerodynamics, and changes based on combat feedback from Soviet pilots. The P-63 would never see major American combat service, but like its predecessor, it was shipped to the Soviet Union in large numbers and proved highly effective in Soviet hands. More importantly, the lessons learned from the P-39's design influenced the next generation of American fighters. Tricycle landing gear became standard on virtually all later American aircraft. The emphasis on pilot visibility, which Bell pioneered with the P-39's car door-style cockpit entry, became a priority in fighter design. The concept of mounting heavy, slow-firing weapons in the nose, proven by the P-39's success with its 37mm cannon, influenced weapon choices for years to come. When Lockheed's Kelly Johnson started designing America's first operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star in 1943, the plane that emerged looked strikingly similar to the P-39's layout. Both had tricycle landing gear for better handling. Both emphasized pilot visibility and easy maintenance. Both put the engine behind the pilot, though in the P-80 this was required by jet engine design rather than to make room for a nose cannon. The P-80 represented everything the P-39 tried to be but couldn't quite achieve, taking the good ideas while fixing the flaws. The connection between the despised P-39 and America's jet-age success wasn't coincidence. It was evolution, driven by hard lessons from both failures and victories. The P-39's failure at high altitude forced American engineers to understand how critical engine performance was across the entire flight envelope. Its success in Soviet hands taught that there's no single definition of an effective fighter. Mission needs, where you're fighting, and how you fight all influence what makes a design successful. Alexander Pokryshkin, the Soviet ace who mastered the P-39, ended the war with 59 confirmed victories, making him the second highest scoring Allied ace after Ivan Kozhedub's 62 kills. He was awarded Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times, the highest honor the nation could give. In his post-war writings, he talked extensively about the Airacobra, calling it the finest fighter he ever flew. The American machine taught me everything important about air combat. It rewarded skill and punished mistakes. It gave me the tools to survive and the weapons to destroy my enemies. More than 4,700 P-39s were delivered to the Soviet Union during the war, nearly half of all Airacobras ever built. Soviet pilots flew them from Stalingrad to Berlin, racking up thousands of victories against the Luftwaffe. These were the same aircraft American and British pilots rejected as unfit for combat. The same flying coffins test pilots refused to fly. In Soviet hands, they became instruments of victory. The production lines in Buffalo finally shut down in August 1944 after building 9,584 P-39s in various versions. The workers who built them probably never knew the full story of how their aircraft performed in combat. They'd read the negative reports from American pilots, heard the criticism, understood that the fighters they were building were considered failures by their own military. They couldn't have known that on the Eastern Front, those same fighters were helping turn the tide of the largest land war in history. By 1950, the P-39 had vanished almost entirely from military service. Jets had taken over completely, making propeller-driven fighters obsolete except in limited roles. Most Airacobras were scrapped, their aluminum melted down for other uses. A few survived in museums, preserved as examples of wartime technology. But the plane's influence lived on in every American fighter that followed, carrying forward lessons learned from both its failures and its unexpected successes. The story of the P-39 Airacobra challenges comfortable ideas about technology and military superiority. It shows that success and failure often depend on context, that the same design can be both terrible and excellent depending on how it's used. It proves that innovation sometimes comes from unexpected places, and that progress is rarely straight or predictable. American designers who initially mocked the P-39's unusual layout later adopted many of its features in their jet fighters. Soviet pilots who received the plane as cast-offs from their American allies transformed it into one of the war's most effective weapons. The lessons from this contradiction shaped American aviation for decades, teaching engineers that brilliance and failure often exist in the same design, separated only by how and where that design is used. The engineers at Bell Aircraft who designed the P-39 with such high hopes never intended to create a controversial failure that would find redemption in Soviet service. They'd imagined an innovative fighter that would dominate aerial combat with unprecedented firepower and revolutionary layout. When American pilots rejected their creation, calling it a flying coffin, it must have been devastating. Yet their design choices, even the ones that failed, helped build the foundation of American jet aviation. The factory workers in Buffalo who riveted together thousands of P-39s, knowing their product was unwanted by their own military, showed a different kind of courage. They maintained quality and craftsmanship even when building aircraft their own pilots called death traps. They kept the production lines running when common sense suggested the program should be canceled. Their dedication meant that when the Soviets desperately needed fighters, aircraft were available to send them. Today, the few surviving P-39s sit in museums alongside Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and other celebrated fighters of World War II. Museum signs typically describe it as an unsuccessful design that found unexpected success in Soviet service. That description, while accurate, misses the deeper meaning of the plane's story. The P-39 represents something more important than success or failure in combat. It represents the messy, complicated reality of technology development, where failures teach lessons just as valuable as successes. The fighter nobody wanted ended up teaching American aviation designers everything they needed to know about building the world's finest aircraft. Its flaws exposed critical gaps in understanding. Its unexpected success in Soviet hands proved that design requirements must match operational reality. Its innovative features, refined and improved, became standard parts of jet fighter design. The flying coffin became the foundation for American air superiority in the jet age. When the North American F-86 Sabre, America's premier jet fighter of the Korean War era, took to the skies in 1947. It carried DNA from the despised P-39, the tricycle landing gear that made ground handling safe and predictable, the emphasis on pilot visibility and cockpit comfort, the understanding that fighter design required careful balance between competing needs. These weren't abstract principles. They were hard-won lessons bought with the embarrassment of rejection and the unexpected glory of Soviet victories. The story of the P-39 Airacobra reminds us that history's judgments are rarely simple or final. The aircraft dismissed as America's worst fighter contributed more to American aviation development than many celebrated designs. The flying coffin that pilots refused to fly enabled Soviet pilots to achieve scores matching the war's greatest aces. The failure that should have been canceled taught lessons that shaped the future of aerial combat. Sometimes the machines we reject teach us more than the ones we embrace, and sometimes the worst becomes the foundation for the best.